Welcome to the Fourth Branch program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening. Ignorance is the biggest threat to any democracy. John F. Kennedy said, "The ignorance of one voter in a democracy impairs the security of us all." Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the Fourth Branch program. First, a warning. This program is not suitable for all audiences. I repeat, the content of this program is not for everyone. To find out if it's suitable to you, answer the following two questions. One, would you entrust your teenage daughter to a known rapist? Question number two, would you have a known pedophile cared for your toddler? Once again, would you entrust your teenage daughter to a known rapist? And question number two, would you have a known pedophile cared for your toddler? Your time is up, obviously. If you had difficulty answering either question, this program is not for you. If you answer yes to either or to both questions, this program is definitely not for you. But if both of your answers are absolutely not, this program is catered to you. It is enlightening, educational, informative, and interesting. The Fourth Branch program is catered exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Today we have a very interesting program which looks at the fight that has just begun in regards to the entitlement. It is an interesting fight, but it is not a fight that we, the people, can sit on the sideline and watch. It impacts our lives, those of our children, our grandchildren, and even our great-grandchildren. We started the conversation yesterday. We will continue it today. Stay with me for just a moment and we will come back to continue with the conversation. Today it is part 2 of the fight regarding the entitlement. I'll be right back. Join me here on the 4th branch at 10:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. every Saturday. First, an announcement. The content of this program and all past contents can be found on the People Branch YouTube channel. Again, the content of this program and all past program can be found on the People Branch YouTube channel. This is the information on the screen. Take note of it. Now, we started yesterday to talk about the entitlement program, or fight rather, because of a very specific piece of event. I will take the opportunity to mention that the 4th branch program is not a news program. It is a program which catered exclusively to discuss topics of interest which might be in the news, but topics which will impact our lives today and lives of future generations. So every time a topic comes in the news, if we suspect or we analyze that that particular piece of information, that particular news, that particular event may impact our lives, then we will take a look at it and bring some information, do some research and bring some information to the surface in order for you to be able to make informed decision, not based on sound bites, not based on political affiliation, but rather based on information, actual accurate information. A couple of days ago, Mitch McConnell, who is the Senate Majority Leader, Republican Senate Majority Leader, gave an interview to Bloomberg. And in the interview, Mr. McConnell said that, and that's referring to the debt, Mr. McConnell said that it is a bipartisan problem. Now, I'm not going to go over the detail again because yesterday on part 1, episode 1, we discussed at length this particular aspect of the discussion. So I will mention just very quickly that what Mr. McConnell was referring to is the fact that the national debt has gone up. And just 2 months within the Trump administration, the Republican, who are completely in control of all branches of the government, have already added $2.2 trillion to the deficit. And I also must add that all that was done without any input from the Democrats, without any approval from the Democrats. But we brought that to your attention because Mr. McConnell said it is a bipartisan problem, which implies that the debt that has gone up, both Democrats and Republicans are responsible of that. Now, again, I'm not going to go through the process of explaining what I've already explained yesterday. But let's move forward. We started talking about what Mr. McConnell said and how that will impact our lives. But before we actually get to the bottom of what Mr. McConnell proposed, we want to look at each individual aspect of his proposal and see how that's going to affect us. Now, Mr. McConnell mentioned that in order to get the debt, to get a handle on the debt, we're going to have to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, of course, all of them under the umbrella, the entitlement. So every time you hear Republican talking about entitlement, that's really what they're referring to. Everything that presumably is given to people, and the underlying assumption is that they didn't work for it, they don't deserve it, it's just the government that giving them a handout. That's why we decide to take a look at those different aspects of the entitlement in order to get a better understanding of that, because politicians are very good at framing the discussion in such a way that even members of their own party are deceived by the way that they present it. And that's the reason you see the state of the country is in the predicament it is today. Now, the argument that has been around for quite some time now is the debt has been growing because of, when we talk about entitlement system, Mr. McConnell is talking about Medicare, he's talking about Medicaid, he's talking about Social Security, he's talking about welfare. Those are what Mr. McConnell is referring to that needs to be cut. Now, although I propose not to talk about the aspect, episode 1 of what we already talked about yesterday, meaning the introduction to discussing the entitlement system, is the fact that while Mr. McConnell proposed to cut Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, the very benefit which help people in the lower bracket to survive when either they're not working, they're sick, they become old, he wants to cut those benefits. But at the same time, the very first thing that Mr. McConnell did, along with the Republican legislative branch, who is in control of both houses, was to pass a quote-unquote tax cut, which, by the way, only benefit the wealthy individual and large corporation. So I want you to keep that part in mind. And in fact, yesterday I proposed and I provided to you this picture of what the $1.5 trillion tax cut did. $1.2 trillion out of that went to wealthy individual and large corporation. And only 0.3 went to divide among everybody at the bottom. Now, I want you to keep that picture in your mind, because that's really what this conversation is about. Because every time that Republicans bring this to the surface, for reason that boggle the mind, they have to always resort to deception in order to try to pass a piece of legislation to come up with an agenda. And I say it is actually a deception, because when they were passing the so-called tax cut, they say it was for the people. As you just saw, $1.2 trillion out of the 1.5 went to large corporation and wealthy individual, and 0.3, that means it's not in the trillion for the people, 0.3, which is equivalent to $300 billion, were used to distribute among the people. Just $300 billion for the people to distribute among the people, and $1.2 trillion, which is most of the money that they borrowed, went to wealthy individual and large corporation. But the kicker is this. We, the people, are fully, totally responsible for the $1.5 trillion debt plus whatever interest is accrued. What I'm saying, the money, the bulk of the money is given to wealthy individual and large corporation. We, the people, get really crumbs, but we're responsible for the whole debt. To put it in perspective for you so that you can understand what I'm talking about, suppose that your kids go and borrow $100,000 from the bank and come by and say, Dad, Mom, here's $20,000. Almost saying it's a gift. I'm giving you $20,000. So of course you're happy. Why wouldn't you? You're receiving $20,000 from your kids, grandkids, whoever it happened to be. Except for one problem. In a couple of years, you will be receiving a bill, a statement that says you owe $100,000 plus any accrued interest. And what I'm telling you is not a joke, is not a speculation. That's just the way that tax cut, that legislation was passed. That's the way that Republican shaped that legislation. That the country borrowed $1.5 trillion, 1.2 were given to wealthy individual and large corporation, $300 billion divided among the people at the bottom. But in the end, the statement, the bill will come to the people to pay for the whole thing. Corporation, wealthy individual have to pay nothing. Absolutely zero. They on the hook for nothing. But we, the people who did not receive much of it, we're responsible for the whole bill. Now, Mitch McConnell is saying, well, in order to pay for that debt, why don't we cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid? Now, you may not understand what that means, but here's what that means in particular. Now, I'm going to put it in terms so that you really understand when politicians come and try to sell you something. Now, I heard a few Republicans saying that I'm grateful that I get an extra $40 or $60 on my paycheck. Now, that is equivalent to exactly what I just explained. That a kid that borrowed $100,000 come home and give to his or her parents $20,000, which the parents will be grateful. And that's exactly what those Republicans who get an extra $40 and $60 on their paycheck, they're so grateful for, except for one problem. They're not aware that very soon they will be handed the bill for the $1.5 trillion. And it will be for the whole amount. So the $40, $60 that they're getting today, that they're so happy, so grateful for, now if they don't live long enough, because within 2 to 3 years, we're going to start receiving the bill, we the people. Now, if you don't live long enough to have to be part of those paying that bill, then you don't care. But your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids will spend a lifetime paying for it. So whatever you're grateful for, it's a joke. But here's what makes it even worse. In fact, that's the reason we propose to discuss the entitlement system, because the more we're hearing the way that Republicans are trying to hurt the constituent, and it's not hurting Democrats, it's hurting the whole American constituent. Those who are considered middle class are on the hook to pay back every penny of the $1.5 trillion debt. But it is actually worse than that. In the previous video, which I mentioned, please do take a look at the People Branch YouTube channel to take a to review the episode 1 of the fight to the big entitlement system. I call it Back to the Fight of the Entitlement System. So I really encourage you to take a look at that, because we're going to have several different episodes of discussing the different aspects. Today, we will be talking about the Social Security aspect. But I want to talk in general about what exactly Mitch McConnell meant when he said we're going to have to cut Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid after handing a bill of $1.5 trillion to we the people. Now, here's what that means. Now, before I say that, keep in mind that the $1.5 trillion is for the tax cut, but there is already a $675 billion added to that, to the debt, that's for defense spending. So in total, after 2 years of the Trump administration, we already have a $2.2 trillion added to the debt. All we, the people, are responsible for. So picture it this way, because you may be sleeping, or you may be thinking that Republicans are so great, they're doing everything for the country. Because the part that you have to understand, when someone come and tell you, and unfortunately, as I explained yesterday, that there is this level of simplicity in the Republican constituent in the way that they understand things. They have this simple-minded ability that it most of the time it is very difficult for Republican in general, irrespective of their level of education, to process complex matters. I'm not the one who say that. It's scientifically proven. And you can also take a look at the past video that I produced, which is under the title, Are Republicans Dumber Than Democrats? And I produced a number of videos in form of a documentary in which I presented the scientific evidence as to why Republicans are unable to process complex life-related matters. That aside, the Republican legislators, they only trade in deception. Because I said they trade in deception, because if they did not, when they were doing the tax cut, because if you remember clearly, Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, a lot of Republicans were out there drumming the beat, it's a tax cut for the people. I'm sure you remember that. But while they were doing that, saying that it's a tax cut for the people, they know that the legislation they were working on, the majority of the money they're going to borrow will not go to the people. So it is deception. So it's not like it becomes as a surprise to them when all things were done and they say, oh my God, the people didn't get anything. They know because they're the one who were working on that legislation. So they were structuring it such a way that $1.2 trillion will go to wealthy individuals and large corporations, and only $300 billion will be distributed among the people. They knew that. They were the one doing it. In fact, only Republicans were working on that. No Democrats were invited. So that's why I mentioned, and every time, watch any piece of legislation they're working on, they work the base of what they're going to present to the public is purely based on deception. Now, tell me, if you knew that the $1.5 trillion that were being borrowed, not that the country has the money is being borrowed. Who does that? You go and borrow money to give to those who already have. Now, you tell me, Republican, Democrat, whatever your political affiliation is, if someone were to come to you and say, I'm going to borrow X amount of money, let's say I'm going to borrow $100,000 and I will give you $10,000, but you will be responsible for the whole $100,000. I don't know however stupid an individual is would agree to something like that. Nobody would. So had the Republican came forward and say the $1.5 trillion, 1.2 out of that will go to wealthy individual and large corporation, you, the people, will only get $300 billion, I am fairly certain that there will be an outrage. People will take to the street and say no. But they deal in deception. And that's what Republican legislators do best. They deal in deception. They deceive everybody. They deceive Democrats. They deceive their own constituents. They deceive the whole country. Because it wasn't a surprise to them. They did it anyway. But here's why what Mitch McConnell is suggesting, actually, the minute that I heard that, I said, I have to treat that subject because it actually bothers me for two reasons. One, the Republican legislators already put we the people on the hook for $1.5 trillion debt. Now 2.2 if we add the defense spending amount that were also added to the debt. Not only we are on the hook for that to repay that debt, but Mitch McConnell proposed to cut Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, anything that people that he just handed that $1.5 trillion bill, because that's really what he just did with the $1.5 trillion money that was borrowed. Not only he did hand us that bill, but he said, let's cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. In a sense, is what he's saying. Now, we will be talking about Social Security shortly, but here's what he's saying. Not only now we have a bill, a huge bill to pay, that we are not going to be able to finish paying it. Our kids, our grandkids, our great-grandkids are going to be on the hook for that. But on top of that, here's what he's saying. When we retire, the little Social Security check that the government owes us, and I say owes, not will give, because whenever you hear Republican talking about the entitlement system, they implying that it's a handout. Social Security is not a handout. When we work, The government took money from our paycheck. It's a social security withdrawn from our paycheck and put someplace for our retirement. So it's not a handout, but it is what Mitch McConnell is saying. When we retire, that money also is going to be penalized. How so? Because if he cuts Social Security, let's say for sake of argument, I don't know what it is, but let's say for sake of argument, I was going to receive $5,000 a month. What Mitch McConnell is saying, now I may only receive 4, 3, because he needs that money, the same money that not only he already penalized me by handing me a bill rather, for $1.5 trillion, but he's saying, well, in your retirement age, you're not going to be living the way that you plan to live, because you're not going to receive the whole Social Security check you may be entitled to. Now, I don't know about you, but it doesn't matter which political party you belong to. You have to start mining for your own health, your own well-being, your own interest, because it is a given. Politicians are not in the business of doing things on behalf of the people. If something is done and the people benefit, it's not because it's intended to, it's because it so happened to be. Politicians in general, Republicans in particular, do not do things for the general public. They do things for large corporations, for wealthy individuals, because they expecting those individuals in return to provide them with large financing money when they run for office, for election or re-election. So you may be a Republican and think, I'm always going to vote Republican because, well, Democrats, they're a bunch of libtards. I'm not sure if that's the way that Republican calls Democrat, but they have different names for them. But ironically, the representative they so trust to do the job of passing legislation to help the constituent, now those same legislators are the one doing things to harm and to hurt the constituent. How about that for a representative? One, a tax bill, a tax cut for the wealthy and the large corporation, but a tax bill for we the people, because as I mentioned, to those individuals who see a $40, $60 on their paycheck and think this is manna from heaven, it's not going to, first of all, it's not permanent. And second of all, it's not a gift, because you on the hook for the whole $1.5 trillion that just added to the debt. You, your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids are going to have to pay for it. Now, Republicans are, especially the Republican legislators, they have it figured out. They have figured it out. Bill Clinton left the Oval Office and left the country with a surplus. Bill Clinton, in case you don't know, Democrat. George Bush walks in within a year, not only wipe out surplus, but he also increased the deficit, add to the debt. And in the process, the country went into a meltdown, financial meltdown. When Obama left the country, the economy was booming. No reason to borrow money. But Republicans judge it necessary to borrow $1.5 trillion, not to give to the people, but to give to large corporations and wealthy individuals. This program is not Democrat or Republican. It just look at the facts and present it to you the way it is. What I am currently talking about is not something that's made up. It is something that you can look for yourself. It's everywhere, the government site. Go and look at the Congressional Budget Office website. It's there. You can look it up. Now, why they do it, we can speculate, and it's pretty obvious. Because if you borrow money and hand the bill to the people, but give the money to large corporation and wealthy individual, you don't have to be a genius to figure out why. You're not going to go to the Congressional Budget Office and find that information. But that's why we have a brand, so that we can drive to those type of conclusion. But let's take a short break, and then when we come back, we're going to take a look at the Social Security aspect of this deal, because Mitch McConnell proposition in order to tackle the debt that it just increased is to cut Social Security, to cut Medicare, to cut Medicaid, and of course hand the bill to we the people. Amazing, isn't it? We'll be right back. In 1996, a small network by the name of Fox News was launched with just 17 million viewers. Today, with over 100 million people watching regularly, Fox has become the greatest threat to our democracy, constantly bombarding the airwaves with false information, distortion of facts, and outright lies, presenting to its audience as news. Fox has created an army of blissful ignorance. According to a recent survey, 82% of Fox viewers are ignorant of facts and the truth. To keep millions of people in ignorance not only prevents democracy from flourishing, but it also clears the path to authoritarianism, to dictatorship. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Let me finish by saying that democracy cannot survive in an environment where truth and facts do not matter. At Fox, truth and facts do not matter. Indeed, democracy in America is in jeopardy. It is a crisis the country can no longer ignore. We are talking about the entitlement system, which comprises Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, or welfare. Actually, from a Republican perspective, anything that is perceived to be given to an individual, like a handout, so to speak, is considered part of the entitlement system. And the reason we're talking about it is because it has a major impact in our lives and in the lives of future generations and many future generations to come. Mitch McConnell, in an interview, according to Bloomberg, just recently mentioned that the way to tackle the growing debt, which he called a bipartisan problem, despite the fact that this year, every single penny, and it's pretty pennies, that has been added to the debt, $2.2 trillion to be exact, is solely, fully, exclusively the work of the Republican Party, the same party that like to be called fiscally conservative, the same party that always bashing when a Democrat administration is the Oval Office. Yes, that same party, just 2 months within the Trump administration, already added $2.2 trillion to the debt. And in order to, quote unquote, tackle this problem, Mitch McConnell proposed to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, anything at all that he perceived as being a handout. Now, I have personally great interest in talking about that because the logic doesn't jive. No one in their right mind, in his or her right mind, no sound-minded individual would borrow money to give to those who already have and hand out the bill to those who are struggling to live. It just doesn't make any logical sense. But as if that's not good enough, Mitch McConnell now proposed the little survival benefit that they have, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. Mitch McConnell proposed to cut that. So it's mind-boggling that someone who is supposed to be conservative not only run a tab that he had to borrow for, but now he's trying to punish the people who had no say on what he was doing. Now, on to Social Security. The item that we're talking about is the item you see on your screen, on the left-hand side of your screen. It's the Social Security, the Medicare, the Medicaid, welfare. Those are the items that Mitch McConnell was referring to. Now, let's take a look at the Social Security aspect. I mentioned earlier that the Social Security is not a handout, because whenever Republicans say entitlement, they really trying to tell their audience, who seem to be too naive to understand this concept, to grasp the concept, Social Security is not handout from the government. The government didn't decide because when you get old or when you retire and say, here's some money to to hold on to. No, it's not a handout. While you were working, if you look at your pay stub, every single pay period, money is taken out under an item called Social Security. That is the money that the government take and put someplace, and when you retire and can no longer work, the money is being given to you in small chunks. It's not a handout. James Clyburn, who is a Democratic congressman in the South Carolina 6th District, he's the way that he talks about Social Security. This conversation was actually, I believe, during the 2016 presidential election, and he was at that time campaigning on behalf of Hillary Clinton. He said that when too many of our senior citizens who were living their golden years in the darkness of economic security, Democratic President Franklin Roosevelt and a Democratic Congress created Social Security, lighting a candle while the Republican cursed the darkness. And he went on to say, when too many of our elderly found their lives darkened by unaffordable and inaccessible health care, Lyndon Johnson and a Democratic Congress lit the candle of Medicare and Medicaid while Republicans stood on the sideline and cursed the darkness. Now, there is some truth to what James Clyburn said. And I want you to pay close attention to that aspect of the country evolving from the time that the United States has become a republic independent from Great Britain to today. Every major benefit to help the helpless, to help the vulnerable, to help the weak, Democrats have always answered the call. But for reasons that are still beyond my understanding, Republicans are always against that. You see the Social Security we're talking about today? When Roosevelt, it was during the New Deal, signing of the New Deal, that Franklin Roosevelt proposed the Social Security as a way to protect those who are advanced in age, those who are disabled, so that they can have something to hold on to, because the country was taking from them, from workers, and yet in their golden years, the country just kicked them to the side and for them to fend off for themselves. So Franklin Roosevelt, maybe it was a revelation, whatever the case was, but judge it necessary to create a system to help those people, the senior citizen, which means while you're working, you put money into the Social Security, but when you get older, when you retire, there is nothing. So think of it in a different way. Every time you get paid, you go to the bank and deposit money. And the purpose of doing that is, at the end of your life, when you retire, you figure out you're going to the bank, you're going to go to the bank to withdraw money, so that now, since you're not working, that's going to be where you're going to take the money from. But picture for 1 second that after you spend decades putting money in the bank, when you finally retire, there is no money in the bank. And the bank says, sorry. So Franklin Roosevelt was wise enough to figure out that's not fair, and came up with this way of helping those who were putting money in the system, and when they retire, they no longer can work, but at least they can get something to live with, to live by. Now, I don't have to convince you, history is already written. Republicans were overwhelmingly against that. The Social Security we're talking about. And this is not the first time. In fact, the healthcare problem that we've been talking about, it's dated really since our independence, that there has been fight to have a health system to help everybody. Every step of the way, Republicans say no. So, Social Security, that was the same thing. They opposed the passing of the Social Security Act because to them, it doesn't matter. The hell with the senior citizen, the hell with the old people. When they get old, if they don't have anything, they should die. Yes, Republicans oppose the passing of the Social Security Act. And again, it wasn't just that. When Franklin Roosevelt proposed Medicare, again, Republicans were against that. Yes, the same Medicare that takes care of all people when we become old, if we're not wealthy, not billionaire, millionaire, then we will depend to a large extent on Medicare. Republicans say, no way, we're not going to accept that. But as you can see, those systems are around because Democrats push, and eventually there were a few Republicans who joined the rank, and that's why we have those systems now. It is a behavior in general. If you see that Republicans oppose something that Democrats are doing, if you are a Republican, I would say to join the Democrat, because chances are it's because it's something not just good for a few people, but it will be good for the country. Social Security benefit everybody that goes on retirement. Medicare, same thing. Now, if we fast forward to today, you may not remember it, but I'll remind you. The same thing happened with Obamacare. Even up to today, just the other day when Mitch McConnell was giving the interview, he said, if Republicans keep the House, they're going to make sure that they kill Obamacare. Now, it is difficult for you to understand. Republicans in general, as I mentioned, are unable to process complex information. It's the structure of their brain according to science. But I don't think you need to be a genius to understand that while you may not see the benefit, but if you see that it is benefiting a large group of people, that alone should be a clue that maybe, just maybe, we should go along with that. It's proven with Social Security. It's proven with Medicare. It's proven with Medicaid. And there is a tons of other legislation as well. Those are the major ones that you cannot miss. Now, back to Social Security. Social Security is not a handout, as I mentioned earlier. This is not something that the government give you, you did not deserve. You work and you contribute, you add to Social Security coffer. Every single individual who works in this country contributes toward the Social Security treasury. We put money in there so that when we get old, when we retire, that money is being given to us in smaller chunks, in small chunks. So it's not a handout. Now, just before we talk about the big aspect of the Social Security that impacts our life, let's take a quick look at that particular act. On August of 1935, Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was the 32nd President of the United States, signed the Social Security Act. Now, in order to manage this aspect of this program, now the Commissioner of Operation is responsible for the management of the Social Security Fund. Well, I should say the Social Security in general. All aspects of Social Security must be managed by the Commissioner of Operation. Now, just a tidbit of history on this. The Social Security is, the headquarters of the Social Security is in Woodlawn, Maryland. It is the central office. Now, the agency itself has 10 regional offices. As of talking today, there are 10 regional offices for the Social Security Administration. There are 8 processing centers, and at very least there are 1,300 field offices, and to service those who have a need or customer service for need to access customer service. There are 37 teleservice centers that cater to Social Security. Now, as of 2018, there are currently 60,000 people who are employed by the Social Security Administration. Now, the Social Security itself has gone through a number of changes. Now, those changes do not impact much the way that Social Security operates, and does not change much the purpose of the Social Security. Now, if that's of interest to you, we just mentioned that the Social Security Social Security Act was passed on August of 1935. Now, on October of 1936, that just a year later, that was the first Social Security office was opened, and it was in Austin, Texas. And the first individual who received a Social Security check was someone by the name of Ida Fuller. Someone by the name of Ida Fuller received the first Social Security check. It was in the amount of $22.54. That was in January 1940. So that's 5 years after the Social Security Act was signed by Franklin D. Roosevelt in August of 1935, Ida Mae Fuller from Vermont received the first Social Security check in January of 1940. Ida was born, I believe, in 1879. Now, as I mentioned, the Social Security itself has gone through a number of changes, mostly from an administration perspective, from a structure perspective, I should say, not so much an administration perspective. And what that has done is it had created at some point in history some doubt as to whether the Social Security Administration will survive. Because we do have even one instance when one of the president, I believe it was Lyndon Johnson, who actually borrowed money from Social Security Fund in order to fund the Vietnam War. That was the first time the Social Security coffer was used for something other than Social Security. Lyndon Johnson was the president behind that. Now, the next president, as it is always the case, there is always a first one, and there is going to be a second one. And the second president who actually did that was Ronald Reagan in 1980, and that was not for war, but rather for military buildup, when Ronald Reagan was trying to strengthen our military. His administration had to make use of the Social Security Fund to do that. Now, we haven't had another president going into the Social Security coffers to take money from it, but those two instances did get a few people to be jittery about the Social Security in general, whether government, a president, or what have you, at some point they're going to use the Social Security Fund for other purposes. Now, although it sounds straightforward what I just said about the Social Security being used for other purpose, but in reality, the actual fund for the Social Security was never in jeopardy in both instances. What I meant by that, despite the fact that we say that Lyndon Johnson first and Ronald Reagan second did go into the Social Security Fund in order to, one, fund the Vietnam War, and two, do military buildup, in reality, it was mostly paperwork than it was withdrawing money from the Social Security itself. It was what you would call in the private sector cooking up the book. So what those two presidents did, when it looks bad for the country, the amount of debt that the country had, and because of that, it would be impossible for Lyndon Johnson to continue the war in Vietnam, because the country was really seriously in debt. So in order to show a better picture of the state of affairs in the country, so he makes certain that the Social Security becomes part of government fund. Now, the best way to explain that is to say, for instance, if you were to have to be married, and your spouse has a bank account, and you also have your own bank account, because before you got married, maybe each one of you had a bank account. But once you get married, usually they have a joint account. But for reason that maybe whatever the reason is, you kept a separate bank account. Now, one of you never really has money on the bank account, but the other has plenty. So at some point you decide to merge the account. Now, once the account merge, what's going to happen? It's going to look as if both of you are doing just fine. But in reality, it's just one individual that's doing that well, but the other individual is not really doing great. But from a joint account perspective, it looks like the couple is doing great. That's really what those two presidents did in order to pad, so to speak, the government fund. It looks great, it looks better. Reporting, meaning that you see less debt, less deficit, less problem, but in reality, the problem are hidden behind the Social Security, because the fund in the Social Security offset the amount of debt, the amount of problem that the United States government has. So that's pretty much it. Now, before we move forward with this, now there are a couple of things that I need to point out to you in order to make certain that if you're paying attention, then it is time. Number one, if you are dealing with Social Security, I strongly advise you and I encourage you. In fact, I am warning you not to Google Social Security. Now, if you do, and that's the reason I put this information for you on the screen, the Social Security, the correct Social Security website is the ssa.gov. Now, if you Google Social Security, you will find a lot of sites on the web that under the Social Security. Some of them use the same logo. They are very deceiving. And they will ask you information that seems to be relevant in order to provide you with whatever information you're looking for. For instance, they may ask you for your name, your date of birth, your Social Security, and so on and so forth, and tell you that in order to provide you with whatever you're looking for, they need those information from you. Now, the warning is this: unless you see this website that ends with ssa.gov, ssa.gov, if you don't see the ssa.gov as being part of the website, chances are you are passing information, you are passing your personal information to some crook sitting somewhere that's going to be using your information. So be very careful. The information you have here is the actual information, and the customer service 800 number. If you're not certain, if you're not sure, it's probably better to call the customer service and get that information from them. Now, at the bottom of the screen, it's a link in the on the Social Security website that give you tips about fraud. Because when you go online, you will find a bunch of crooks. Because once they get your Social Security, they get your date of birth, the sky is the limit what they can do with your information. So be very careful. Do not Google your Social Security. And if you do, make sure you only click on the one that ends with ssa.gov, and you're very certain that you are on the Social Security, the government, the U.S. Social Security website before you start providing your information. Now, having said that, it is also a good idea to sign up in the Social Security website, because once you do, you sign up, you have an account, a user ID, a password, and that will also very good for you, because it will tell you how much money you are entitled to at the time that you're looking at that information. Of course, at the time of your retirement, you also will get a sense as to how much money you are entitled to. So it is a great idea to do that. and I will re-emphasize the fact that Social Security is not a handout. Yes, when Republicans are talking about entitlement, they tend to put Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, although all those three are part of the welfare system, but they tend to look at welfare, when we're talking about welfare, as a different item. So we will look at welfare system separately from those three items as well in our discussion. So, number one, Social Security is not a handout. You are entitled to it. You contributed towards it when you were working. So when you retire, it is money that you put into the system and you simply entitled to receive it back. So don't let any one Republican or Democrat or whoever come to you and make you believe or feel that you are being given a handout when you're receiving Social Security. It's not a handout. It's money that you set aside, just like if you were to put money on your 401k, it's money that you set aside, but 401k is private, Social Security is government. So you put that money in the government coffers so that when you retire, you can receive in smaller chunk that part of the money. So don't let anybody make you believe that because you're hearing people, you always heard the expression that the Social Security coffer is going to be empty and so on and so forth. Well, while that may be the case, that shouldn't be our problem. The fact that the government mismanaged the money should not be the problem of any individual, because when we retire, we've been putting money in the system. We're expecting to get some of that money back. So when Mitch McConnell is talking about cutting Social Security as if it's a favor that the government is doing to us, for us, it is not. We are entitled to that money. We pay towards it. So when we retire, when we get old, we expect to get that money back. So Mitch McConnell or any other Republican do not have the right to cut out of that money either. So they mismanage the government. In fact, we have that example right in front of our eyes. Just this year alone, they already take $2.2 trillion of money that we didn't have, borrowed that money to give away, and now saying that we're going to cut on your Social Security. Why would we go along with that? Why would that be fair? Now, I don't know about you, but it is not a pleasant thing to hear from any legislator, because it just doesn't make sense to me that it's not a problem. It's not, you created that problem. As I mentioned yesterday, while we may have a debate in terms of national debt, that it's not good under any circumstance, but we can forgive some of the action taken by some administration when they borrow money to make certain things happen. And I'll take the case of Obama. When Obama took over the country was in a financial meltdown crisis. So to borrow money to remedy the problem, while we don't like the idea of borrowing money, but it was necessary to do so. Nobody can argue with that. If the roof of your house, if there is a leak, if the boiler in your house is gone, broken, not working, now no matter how much in debt you are, you still have to borrow money to fix the roof. You still have to borrow money to buy a new boiler. Yes, it sucks, but it has to happen. So during the Obama administration, those things had to happen because it was necessary. The country is going down a financial meltdown, crisis. Things were bad. So no matter whether it was a Republican or a Democrat administration, then the same approach would have had to be taken. So Obama took the approach of borrowing money. Whether you like it or not is irrelevant. It had to happen. But under the Trump administration, there was no reason for that. That was a voluntary thing that was done. So you have to be able to distinguish when you're talking about debt, because I noticed that usually if you're having a conversation, Republicans have this bad habit. Instead of using logic, they use soundbite and political argument. Now, we can have political argument on anything. Anybody can spin anything. As I mentioned, if the roof of your house is leaking, your boiler is broken, now you can have argument about, well, it was the Democrat that had to borrow money to fix the roof. Well, the roof was leaking when a Democrat walked into the White House. Now, no matter which way you look at it, yes, money had to be borrowed in order to fix the problem. Yes, the debt was increased, but there was a rationale to do so. Now, which rationale do we have under the Trump administration to go and borrow $1.5 trillion and add to the debt? Which rationale is that? There is none, because there is no roof leaking, there is no broken boiler. It just, for sake of doing it, we go and borrow money to go on a vacation, on a world tour. That's the big difference. So logic must prevail when we're talking about those type of things. So it's not a Democrat or Republican thing. Use logic in order to understand why we are where we are. There was no reason whatsoever to borrow $1.5 trillion. There was no reason. But now, Mitch McConnell proposed to cut Social Security. I don't want my Social Security to be cut because I'm not responsible for this kind of borrowing of money to go on vacation to. It wasn't warranted. There was absolutely zero reason to that was done. Zero. There was no justification whatsoever for it. In fact, 60% of the people here in the United States oppose that. So no, Social Security, one, it's not a handout. When I retire, the government will not be handing me money. It's not entitlement the way that Republicans always use the word as some sort of pejorative. It's not. I work, I contribute towards Social Security. When I grow old and retire, if I'm still alive, I want to be able to get Social Security, not someone to cut it because you decide to add debt to our national debt for no reason whatsoever. Yes, I say to Republican constituent, it is time to wisen up because it's not a Democrat or Republican issue. This issue is important because while you may get a $40, $60 on your paycheck and you think, this is great. As I mentioned at the top of this program, those $40 and $60, one, are not permanent, and two, you will pay way much more than $40 or $60 because the $1.5 trillion, you are responsible. We, the people, are responsible for it. Just to get a recap of what we've been talking about. $1.5 trillion were borrowed. 1.2 went to large corporation and wealthy individual. 300 billion went to the rest of the people. Just 300 billion. But guess what? We, the people, are responsible for the whole thing. That's not something I would not support a legislator. I would not vote in office a legislator that's doing those kind of things to the country. You may want to stick to one party, but I just demonstrate to you, Republicans were against Social Security. Today, we're enjoying it. Everybody in the country is enjoying it. Republicans were against Medicare. Today, when you become old, senior citizen, then you too will enjoy Medicare. And every step of the way, Republicans are against things that benefit the country as a whole. But not only they're against what's necessary for the well-being of the citizen in the country, now they want to harm the citizen of the country. Those are not speculation. They're not assumption. They're right there in front of us in black and white. They're part of our history. So the next time you go to the voting booth, you're doing two things. You're hurting the country, and you're hurting your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids, because every time you vote for a representative who does those type of things, you become part of the problem. And it is not a joke. I'll be right back. Ignorance, they say, is the biggest threat to any democracy. Indeed, it is. Plato, a Greek philosopher born in 427 BC, said that ignorance is the root and stem of all evil. Today, members in the Republican Party wear ignorance as a badge of honor, while the rest of the country watch powerless the destruction of a country which was once the envy of the world. The media is the enemy of the country, said Donald Trump. The Democrat legislators are obstructionists for not going along with everything the president wants. The Department of Justice is biased for investigating corruption in the Trump administration. This is the United States of America. Any question? Join me here on the 4th branch at 10:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. every Saturday. I thank you for spending the time with me, and I do invite you to join me tomorrow at this time when we will discuss Medicare. It is the second item of the entitlement system. Today we discuss the Social Security, which you are entitled to. It's not a handout from the government. And when you grow old, you ought to receive a chunk of that money that you are contributing to today. So when Mitch McConnell mentioned they're going to cut Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, as if because it is a hand, then it is okay to do so, it is harming we the people twice. Not only by handing us a bill for which we had no say over, and second, by forcing us to pay for that bill. It is beyond harmful. It is completely disgusting that the very representative that we elected to attend to the affairs of the people are the one who are acting in such a way harmful to us. It is no longer acceptable to just support your political party because you were born into it. Your father, your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents were Republican or Democrat, and that's all it takes. Today it is necessary to use the logical ability that God has given us in order to realize that we ought to take our own destiny in our hands. And in order to do so, we ought to vote out of office those who cannot legislate on behalf of the people. And Mitch McConnell is at the top of that list. The $1.5 trillion was not a tax cut for the people. Yes, it was a tax cut for the wealthy, for the large corporation, and a bill for the people. It is no longer acceptable to just say, okay. No, it is not, because we have seen the consequences of going along with party affiliation, with doing the same thing over and over. And this is those very type of behavior from the Republican legislators which have divided the country. You see, the country is not divided between Democrats and Republicans, but rather between those who seek knowledge and those who choose to stay and live in ignorance. The country is divided between those who seek wisdom and truth and those who promote and enjoy falsehood. Those who make use of their brains and those who have outsourced theirs. The country today is in dire need of a leader who knows the way, shows the way, and is willing to go all the way. I thank you for taking the time to be with me, and I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happened to be. Join me tomorrow for the next section, next episode, which will be Medicare. Good day. The Fourth Branch podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website, located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchesne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the Fourth Branch, live from New York. Good day.